Hello once again, my friends. It is time for some notes. These notes are about the slope formula. The slope formula. As you may remember, slope is designated in math with the letter M. M means slope. Once again, we don't know why it means slope, but it sure does. And the slope of a line is equal to the rise of that line over the run of that line. The rise over the run. Another way to think about the rise is how much does y change, the change in y, and how much does x change, the change in x. So thinking about a graph, on that graph, when we measured how much a line changed for y, that was the rise. When we measured how much a line changed for x, that was the run. And the rise over the run gives us the slope. And remember, we had 4 different options. We could have a positive slope, we could have a negative slope, we could have a 0 slope, or we could have no slope. 1, 2, 3, 4 options: positive, negative, 0, or no slope. Well, it was pretty easy to figure that out using a graph. It's a little more difficult when we only have points in a table. So let's look at how we might do that. Look at example number 1 with me here. Here's a table of values with x and y values. X values of -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Y values of 1, 4, 7, 10, and 13. Here's what I'd like you to write down next to this, is to remind yourself that slope is how much does y change over how much does x change. How much does y change over how much does x change. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick 2 points in this table. So I'll pick these ones right here because they're nice positive numbers. So those points, 1, 7, and 2, 10. So if I look at those points right there, how much does y change from 7 to 10? It changes by going up 3. How much does x change from 1 to 2? It changes by going up 1. So that means our slope is the change in y plus 3 over the change in x plus 1. Well, we don't normally write slope that way. We actually simplify the fraction. So plus 3 over plus 1 simplifies to a slope of 3. And indeed, that is our slope, a slope of 3. And you can see every time we go up the y, it's plus 3, plus 3, plus 3. Because every time x increases, it's plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. So that's a pretty simple one because these are basic numbers. Let's look at one with a little more complex numbers. Example number 2. Example number 2, you'll notice the x values over here do not all increase by 1 every time. So it makes it so we can't just simply count. But remember, slope is the change in y over the change in x. So let's pick some easy numbers to use here. How about, again, I'll grab these ones from the middle because they're all positive. And I'm looking for what is the change in y for the top of the fraction, and what is the change in x for the bottom of the fraction. So with that in mind, the change in y from 27 to 35 is a plus 8. The change in x from 7 to 9 is a plus 2. So we can write our slope as plus 8 over plus 2. Again, that fraction doesn't look normal. We would actually simplify this and make it 8 over 2, and 8 over 2 equals a slope of 4. So our slope in this case is 4. Just like earlier, our slope was 3 for number 1. Our slope here is 4, because every time y changes by 8, x changes by 2. And you could find this using any of the points in that table. So that's option number 1 for finding slope if you don't have a graph. That works with tables. But sometimes We don't even have tables. We just have 2 points. We just have 2 points. So what we're going to need is some way to find the slope. If the slope is the change in y over the change in x. And basically, we're going to see if this is our y value here, and this is our other y value, then how much does it change between those two values? If these are our two x values, then how much does it change between those two values? So what we need to do is we need to designate these values. Remember, slope, change in y over change in x. I'm going to erase that so we have room here. And we're going to designate these values as which x and which y. So go ahead and write down 3, 2 and 8, 5. And then we're going to label them. This is an x value, and this is a y value. This is also an x value, and this is a y value. But we need a way to tell them apart. So we'll call this one x1, and we'll call this one x2. This is called y1, and this one's called y2. And then we're going to find the difference between them. Here's where we need this thing called the slope formula. The slope formula looks like this. Slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And that looks kind of complicated, but if you look at it, y2 minus y1 is just how much does y change. x2 minus x1 is how much does x change. In order to use the slope formula, all we have to do is plug in our values. So look up at your values 3, 2, and 8, 5. I'm going to put those values in their proper places in this formula. So we'll rewrite it. y2 was 5, and then we go minus. y1 was the value 2. x2 was the value 3. Oops, sorry, that's wrong. x2 was actually 8, wasn't it? And x1 was 3. And now we just have to simplify. 5 minus 2 is 3, and 8 minus 3 is 5. And there is our slope. That is the slope of the line that includes those 2 points, using the slope formula. Let's look at another example of the slope formula in action. Let's take a look at these 2 points. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the slope formula for you guys one more time. Remember, slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And then we'll designate our points. This one is x1, this one is y1, this is x2, and that's y2. The last thing that we have to do is plug in the points into the slope formula. So y2 was negative 5 minus y1 is negative 1. x2 is 3 and x1 is 1. So we got a little more complicated situation here to find the slope. Negative 5 minus negative 1 is like negative 5 plus 1, so that's negative 4. 3 minus 1 is simply 2. So we have to simplify that equation to make it a slope of negative 2. That would be our final slope for this, of negative 2, by using the slope formula. And last thing I'm going to do is put the slope formula in a box here and zoom in on it, because you need this written down. If you got nothing else written down, this is the thing that you should have. So let's move that on down and zoom right in. Here's the slope formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and simplify that, and it gives you your value for slope. That's it for today. Make sure you have these notes written down in your notebook, and you submit a picture of them to Schoology.